Thank you, and I'm so excited to be back here. I really feel like I've come home to family. Thank you, Susie. And Philippe, had I known what you were going to say, I would have come wearing a dress. So, anyway, last year in Bali, it was such a pleasure to be there with you. For those of you that were there, we spoke about evidence-based medicine and spaevidence.com to really set the scientific foundation for the spa industry. Well, this year I want to share something innovative with you too. What I want to do is I want to show you how the framework of evidence-based medicine can be used to leverage imagination and innovation as well. But more on that later. In this talk, I want to cover three things. The first thing I want to do is I want to share with you some knowledge about the greatest asset that you possess to drive your imagination and innovation, and that is your brain. Because if you know how your brain works, you'll know how to work your brain, that is to Neurovate, to leverage it for imagination, innovation, as well as peak performance. Second, I want to introduce you to a framework that will help you leverage the optimal conditions for imagination and innovation. And then third, I want to show you how your knowledge of knowing how to leverage imagination and innovation provides a tremendous opportunity for the global spa and wellness industry to innovate itself. So that's my charge. But to frame this all up, I want to ask you each a question. So when it comes to the brain, what do you think is the greatest threat to imagination and innovation that also offers a tremendous opportunity for the industry to innovate itself? I'll give you a clue. Stress, exactly. Stress, okay? And most of us, by the way, are stressed out. Research has shown that more than half of us have moderate stress, and about a quarter of us suffer from extreme stress. And research has also shown that stress gums up, literally gums up our higher cortical circuits that are needed for imagination and innovation. So before we can look at how do we go about navigating stress to leverage it for imagination, innovation, and peak performance, we really have to understand what is the relationship between performance and stress. Just think about that for a moment. It may not be completely intuitive to some of you. Well, we've known the answer to this since the early 1900s with the psychologists Yerkes and Dotson. It's a bell curve. It's a bell curve. So yes, if we have too much stress over here, next slide. If we have too much stress, we don't perform very well. Stress locks down our creative abilities in the brain. I'll show you some of the neuroscience around that in a little bit. But less intuitive. If we don't have any stress as well, next slide. If we don't have any stress at all, one more. Okay. Oh, there, I don't think that's, which is taking me over the up on the stress curve right now. Okay, I'll use my hand, I'll use my finger. If we don't have any stress at all, if you're down here, we're not going to perform very well either. And actually, this is something that John shared with us yesterday. He shared with us, why is it that when jazz musicians go through cutting, or computer programmers go through hackathons, why is it that they perform well? Because ultimately, to perform well, you need to know how to fully engage and drive yourself up the curve. Because if you're bored, apathetic, or complacent, you're not going to perform very, very well either. So you need, ultimately, when you look at what do we need to bring ourselves up both sides of the curve to peak performance? Well, if there was a curve here, what you would need, so just, that's why we're talking about imagination, right? Imagine that there's a curve here. Okay, so what you do, and now we went from imagination to innovation, it manifested, awesome. Okay, so what does it take ultimately to then move us up the curve to peak performance? Well, you need two broad strategies that will drive you towards the peak. And I want you, as I share these with you, think about how you are perfectly suited to drive yourself and your clients to the peak of the curve. Because the one skill set that you need is you need to know how to be able to facilitate the ability to recover from stress rapidly that brings you to the curve from the right. On the other hand, you also need to know how to fully engage and sustain growth by catalyzing your health, relationships, and productivity that then pulls you up the curve over here from the left to the peak. So now each of you, think of all the assets that you have right now that can drive you and your clients to your peak. Well, the blessing is that each of us has one asset that is immediately and hopefully always available. And that is, it's our brain. It's our brain. And as I said earlier on, if you know how your brain works, you'll know how to work your brain to Neurovate, to leverage it for innovation and peak performance. So I did bring with me a prop of the brain, and here it is. It's a hand model. So I'm going to walk you through the key functions of your brain. I'm going to give you a quick tour about this. So over here, first part of the brain, you'll be happy to know that you don't only have one brain. Some individuals claim that we have 3 brains in one. It's also what's known as the triune brain. And the brain in evolutionary terms has developed from the ground up and from the back forward. So at the base of the brain over here, you have the brainstem, represented here by my wrist. The brainstem is also known as the reptilian brain. This part of the brain is responsible for your vital life centers, regulation of respiration, heart rate, blood pressure. It's also responsible for triggering our fight and flight behaviors. Now, unlike reptiles that lay the eggs and skedaddle, ultimately, we as mammals, we suckle our young. So we need another part of the brain represented by the palm of my hand and also represented by this area of the brain over here. This is called the mammalian brain. It's also known as the limbic system. And the limbic system engages in our primal drives. This is our pursuit of food, sex, and the ability and our need to bond with each other. In addition, this over here, this part of the brain, is the seat of our emotions. And there's a very important part of the brain. As I fold my thumb over, at the tip of my thumb is a part of the brain called the amygdala. The amygdala lays down emotional memory. So it is forever scanning in our environment what threatens us and what we like and dislike, because it wants to do a pattern match the next time we come in to keep us safe. So whenever you go into a new situation, whether it be a conference like this or any new challenging environment, your brain subconsciously is doing this. Am I safe or not safe? Am I safe or not safe? Is this a reward or a threat to my time? Is it a reward to a threat to my time? And then what happens is if we get a pattern match of something being unsafe, boom, it's going to trigger fight and flight behaviors and keep us safe. On the other hand, that drive into fight and flight has consequences, because as it drives us into fight and flight, what it does, it also pulls resources away from our higher cortical circuits, so we don't have the ability to be creative. Now, on the flip side of that, this part of our brain, our limbic system, also breeds our frustrations and dissatisfactions as well, which can provide important fuel to drive us forward on imagination innovation too. So the limbic system is involved in creativity too. However, thank heavens we have another part of the brain. And we need another part of the brain as it folds over the top, this top part of the brain, which helps us to both regulate and integrate our limbic system and is responsible for imagination and innovation itself. And this over here, coming over the top, this is the neocortex, or the new brain. It's what gives us really essentially our adaptive and advantage as a species. Now, the neocortex is immensely important. First of all, it's responsible for our conscious awareness. It also has the ability to really weigh the present, to envision the future, to generate ideas, and then to act on, to formulate and act on our decisions, all of which are crucial for imagination and innovation. Now, our neocortex is divided into two hemispheres. The left hemisphere, easy to remember because it has a lot of L's associated with it. It's language, logical, literal, and linear thinking, as opposed to the right side of our brain, which is more involved in abstract thought, poetry, the arts. When John was up here yesterday playing the piano, right side, awesome. And it's also the part of the brain that gives us really a holistic view of both our external and our internal environment as well. So this part of the brain, the right side of the brain, enables us to see the big picture. It enables us to see the forest, as opposed to the left side of the brain, which enables us to see the individual trees itself. Now the brain is also comprised of a number of lobes. At the back over here, so the back over here is the occipital lobe. Occipital lobes are responsible for integrating visual information. Then you get to the back over here and the top of the sides. This is your parietal lobes over here. That part of the brain involves visuospatial processing and sensation. Then you come across to the sides and the front over here. These are the temporal lobes. This is auditory integration and memory. Now, these three parts of the brain, the temporal, occipital, and parietal lobe, have association centers in them. And when your association centers are not shut down by stress, this part of your brain at the back over here enables us to connect widely separated and weird ideas to stimulate something called divergent thinking. This is the part of the brain that creates our most highly original and novel ideas. And I'll talk to you later on about how you get there as well. So this represents highly original and novel ideas. Now there is a part of the brain on the right temporal area that has actually been identified to be responsible for the flash of insight that drives innovation. So you want to take a look? So I found this just before I came to talk. I found this in a study by Jung and Beeman. What you're looking at over here is a scalp electroencephalogram. What it's doing is it's looking at our brain waves activity when somebody put on these scalp electrodes. And if we watch for it here, watch the spot, right? You see it there? You see that spot? That is a spot. That is a spike of what's called gamma band neural activity. It is a type of brainwave activity that binds neurons widely in the brain. That right here is literally your aha or your eureka experience in action. That happens 300 milliseconds before you become conscious of your insight. Now, there's another spot in the brain lighting up right there. See that? That's your prefrontal cortex. That part of your brain is also crucial to imagination and innovation. So let's talk about over here. If we can go to the next slide. One more. So the prefrontal cortex over here is crucial. So first of all, the prefrontal cortex is a part of the brain that is able to tap into your memory circuits. And you can actually begin to remember the future. Doesn't that sound like imagination? So you can tap into your memory circuits, remember the future, and then form a plan of action to achieve your vision. This part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, also has a number of very important functions as well. Firstly, it's this part of the brain, very important for the spinal injury, because when you're talking about regulating stress, it's this part of the brain and all the practices, we'll talk briefly about mindfulness practices, that help you regulate your limbic system to really soothe that limbic response so you can keep your higher cortical circuits open and prevent your limbic system from really hijacking your creative endeavors. Second, it's also involved in empathy, intuition, social awareness, all of those, and morality as well. All of those, what John was mentioning yesterday was the importance of bringing values to our innovation. In addition, the prefrontal cortex also really locks into really circuits of short-term memory. Short-term memory is crucial for us. Why? Because it allows us to create novel associations in a theater of ideas. In addition, this part of the brain is responsible for our executive function, judgment, planning, shifting attention, decision-making, all, again, crucial for imagination and innovation. Now, unlike the temporal occipital parietal lobes at the back here, that's responsible for divergent thinking, the prefrontal cortex is responsible for convergent thinking. That is the linear sequential processing of ideas where you can refine what you've imagined and then you can practically implement your innovation as well. Thank you. Okay, so hopefully that gives you, so actually when you look at those two, let me just summarize over here briefly from what we covered yesterday. When we summarize that, Philippe and John spoke about looking at the moon and having your feet on the ground. Well, looking at the moon is your temporal occipital parietal lobes, that's divergent thinking, as opposed to keeping your feet on the ground is your prefrontal cortex that really involves convergent thinking. Creativity, imagination, innovation is a whole brain process, and it's your ability to flexibly navigate between these and know how to drive all of this together. So now that hopefully you've got a better idea about how your brain works with imagination innovation, now we're ready to consider, well, what strategies could we leverage to drive imagination innovation? So I briefly, in the time that we have, I'd like to introduce you to a framework that I've created that really helps you facilitate wellness, peak performance, and can drive imagination and innovation too. And it's called the 4-in-4 framework to achieve peak performance. So I want to briefly introduce you to this. So it's got 4 steps. It's named the 4-in-4 framework because it's got 4 steps and 4 steps in step 4. And how the model works is when we have stress and self-doubt, it pulls us into reactivity and fight and flight behavior into our limbic system. And again, that draws resources away from our higher cortical circuits. On the other hand, if you have skills where you know how to harness your higher cortical circuits and your prefrontal cortex in particular, you can both regulate and integrate your limbic system to more proactively tap into inspiration and drive creativity that gives your life a sense of meaning and fulfillment. Now, 4 steps are really needed to do this, and I'm not going to have time to go into any depth on this, so I'm so sorry about that. But the first step we need to be able to do is we need to know first, when we're getting reactive, we need to know how to recognize that. So you have to be able to recognize your reactivity. Know what your reactive signature, because it's all subcortical, in terms of your sensations, thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And if you know how to do that, you can take the edge of your reactivity. Then second, you need to know how to, you need to know how to dig below your reactive responses, looking at the triggers of stress and self-doubt that is driving that to begin with, and know how to extract the teeth out of stress and self-doubt. Now, I don't have enough time to go into all of that, but what this entails are cognitive and mindfulness practices that are known on functional MRIs to activate your prefrontal cortex and deactivate your amygdala. So this essentially, these practices help you soothe your reactivity so you retain your higher cortical circuits open for creativity, performance, and innovation. This then brings us to the fun part over here, which is step 3 and step 4, where we really are turning into what are the actual steps that drive imagination innovation itself. So step 3 involves your ability to cultivate creativity by reflecting and acting on what's truly important in your life. And innovation isn't for innovation's sake. It's about tapping into your deepest source of inspiration and your core values that drives innovation. We spoke yesterday about meaning. This is really kind of how you drive innovation off a foundation of meaning. And this over here is a list of things that create what's called the recipe for the flourishing life. It overlaps with work done by Martin Seligman, the father of positive psychology, and he's identified in research that this is the recipe for the flourishing life. So it involves really considering, how is it that you like to learn? How do you like to connect with others, yourself, and your deepest source of inspiration? How do you like to best express yourself, and what is your highest sense of service, your highest sense of values and purpose? And then when you know all of that, I've taken all of that and I can help you wrap that into a process that I call VSIR. And VSIR stands for vision, strategy, implementation, and results. And we then do that across the domains of health, relationships, and productivity. Because if you actually have vibrant health, if you have rich and deep, meaningful relationships, and you have a sense of meaning in the work that you do, that's ultimately going to drive your performance, and it's going to drive a sense of deep meaning in your life. As well as, by the way, it's going to provide something called stress inoculation. It's going to inoculate you from stress as well. And by the way, there's a lot of science over here, for example, when you engage in exercise, how that rewires your brain as well. A lot of data on that too. So that over here is in step 3. And your ability to really optimize health rate and productivity ultimately, in the end, leaves you with an experience of significance and your ability to leave a legacy. So that's step 3. Now we come to the most important step of all. Step 4 is your ability to continually stay on track, where you continue to stay on track moment by moment on your path of inspiration. Why is that important? The reason why that's important is that you can know how to take the edge off your reactivity, you can know how to extract the teeth out of stress and self-doubt, you can know what's important in your life, but stress and self-doubt are going to continue to pull you off track. So how do you stay on track moment by moment by moment? I didn't have the answer until 3 years ago. And then literally one night, like a bolt of lightning out of the blue, in a flash of inspiration, the answer came to me. I wrote one of the first textbooks in the country on evidence-based medicine. I spent the last decade training thousands of physicians now in 45 states in the US on evidence-based medicine. The answer was right under my nose. And let me tell you what, first of all, evidence-based medicine is. Evidence-based medicine is a skill set. And this is, by the way, how all doctors are now trained to make medical decisions. This is how your doctor thinks, by the way. So they're trained first to know how to frame the right questions to begin with. Then they're trained to know how to go out and find the best available scientific information. Then they know how to evaluate that information, and then they know how to apply it to your care. Well, my flash of insight was this framework can be used just as well, not only to help you navigate science, but also to help you navigate inspiration as well. This now becomes a unified framework for navigating science and spirituality on your journey towards health and well-being. So let me show you how this works as it digs into imagination and innovation. This process begins with framing the right questions to begin with. It begins with asking the right questions to begin with. So why is this important? Why is that important? Well, we are now more than a decade out from the decade of the brain. And what science has firmly established is that the thoughts that you have rewire your brain and result in neuroplastic transformation. You have a scalpel in your hand that you can reshape your brain till the end of your life. It's extraordinary. Now, we also spoke yesterday, Philippe, we spoke about complexity. Well, I'll tell you, hands down, the most complex system known to humankind, hands down, is the human brain. Anybody want to have the hazard guess how many neurons? At least 3, right? Okay, 100 billion. 100 billion neurons, each of which make 5 to 10,000 connections. The frequency or the combinations of connections that our brain can make is 10 to the power of 1,000,000. Now let me put that into context. The number of atoms in the known observable universe is only 10 to the power of 80. So the human brain is the most complex system known to humankind. So when we ask questions, much like when you look at chaos theory, in chaos theory, you have a butterfly that flaps its wings. It's an attractor, by the way, it's an attractor, ripples through a complex weather system and results in a tornado in Texas. Well, the most powerful attractors that we have are the questions that we seed in our brain. So if you seed in your brain, I can't do this, that is going to recruit tens of thousands of neurons, and that will become neural destiny. If you seed in your brain, I can and I will, that is going to recruit different neurons and networks, and that will become neural destiny. So the questions you seed are absolutely crucial. And when it comes to stress and self-doubt, and our habitual thought process response to that, we drive ourselves into non-productive places. Because when you have stress and self-doubt, there are 4 possibilities, right? It's what if, and all the bad things that can happen in the future, if only, and all the regrets that I have in the past, and in the present, it's what's wrong with me and what's wrong with others. And does that ever get you to a productive place? No. And the habit of doing that is going to strengthen those neural networks, and literally that becomes neural destiny. So if you want to take a cynical view on the world, that's great, that's fine, but that will become your experience of the world from a brain state. So when it comes to imagination innovation, what are the best questions that we can ask? Again, rather than how we can, rather than why we can't. Great place to start. When it comes to imagination innovation, we want to really focus on some of the central questions like, what are the challenges and dissatisfactions that people are having? And how can we come up with, solutions and imagine a better world and a better result? And then very specifically, we can drive down questions with saying, what specific solutions, products, or processes could we put in place that would be of great benefit to our clients? Also, when it comes over here to looking at asking questions for your clients, here we've spoken about how this is the recipe for the flourishing life. So when you come up with your innovative offerings, it can be very helpful to say, am I satisfying my clients' needs to learn? Am I satisfying their needs to more fully connect with themselves, mind, body, and spirit, and with others and their highest source of inspiration? Are we satisfying the needs to express themselves fully to find their greatest sense of purpose? Are we doing great work to really truly help catalyze their health, relationships, and productivity? So in step one, you can see over here why framing the question is absolutely crucial, because it's going to become ultimately your neural destiny. In step two of step four, we have the find piece. The find piece is, how do we create optimal brain conditions where the answers to our questions can find us? What do you do? How do we leverage the understanding of the brain science? Well, we spoke early on. The first thing you have to need to know how to do is you need to know how to regulate with your higher cortical circuits the limbic systems that can really gum up your creative thinking. Now, if you're able to do that, and we don't have time to talk about that, but certainly there are a lot of practices that facilitate this, one of which is soft belly breathing and mindfulness practice, for example. Now, if you have your higher cortical circuits open, now we need to know, how can we regulate our higher cortical circuits to drive the imagination, innovation, and creative process itself? Well, the real question then becomes, in this moment, would divergent thinking be most helpful, or convergent thinking be most helpful? So, for example, if you're at the beginning of a creative process, where you need to come up with highly original ideas, or let's say you've been working on something, you're getting frustrated, and you've hit the wall and you can't go any further. At that point, what's most helpful is to let go. Just let go. Don't work harder. Stop working. Go out for a run. I'll show you why that's important. You want to deactivate your prefrontal cortex, and you want to let all the information flow forward from the back, the temporal, occipital, parietal lobes, which is your circuits of divergent thinking, where you generate your most highly original and innovative ideas. And a number of factors have been known to facilitate divergent thinking. Relaxation. Sound familiar? Hot showers. Actually, drowsiness before waking, before your prefrontal cortex kicks in. Exercise. Mindfulness practice. The color blue, the seats that you're sitting in. Also, positive emotions. Also, playfulness and visualization. And you're going to get a gorgeous experience about this. I went to the creativity workshop, and I'm so excited that you're going to be doing this next. Thank you so much for what you're about to share with us. So that is all facilitates divergent thinking. On the other hand, if you're at the point in your process where you need to work in a very logical, linear way to solve logical problems, or you're in a situation where you've got your aha experience, you've got this all out, but you've got to figure out, how do I refine this idea? How do I refine it? And then how do we practically implement that innovation? Well, then you need to know how to activate your prefrontal cortex and really execute on convergent thinking. And to do that, there are a number of practices. So first of all, here, rather than thinking less, you need to be able to know how to concentrate and focus your attention. So to really focus. And then for those of you that have had your first cup of coffee, or your first cup or two, you'll be very happy to know that stimulants like coffee can really help focus our thinking. Now, you don't want to drink coffee if you want to get into a divergent space. But if you're at the point of really refining your ideas, coffee's cool. Okay? All right. So you need to know, when am I going to use divergent thinking or convergent thinking in this process. And it's your ability to be flexible across both domains that's going to help you to leverage imagination, innovation to its optimal effect. Now that over here is step 2 of step 4, which helps you, again, find optimal brain coherence so the answers to your questions can find you. Then, in step 3 of step 4, we need to know how to evaluate these answers. I'm going to be very brief here. We need to know how to look at, does this feel right more than it feels good? Because if your clients only operate on what feels right, what feels good, they're not going to commit to a vigorous exercise regimen. They're not going to quit tobacco, not going to do alcohol. So you've got to really educate them, does it feel right more than it feels good? Then you want to know, is it good for you and others? And when it comes to innovation, you want to know, does this get you to a place where you are providing highly novel and original ideas that are truly useful to others? Then the apply piece over here, next. The apply piece is the courage to take action. It's really taking action on your innovative ideas itself. But it doesn't stop there, because once you take action, you come around the spiral. I call this the frame, find, evaluate, and apply spiral of growth, because you ask the next question. And the next question we ask is what we're doing working? And if it is, then we find wonder and appreciation for whatever the source of inspiration is that's driving our innovative process. We give thanks. If we're not there yet, we then ask the next question, how can we drive forward and do better than what we're doing? In this frame, find, evaluate, apply, spiral of growth. And yesterday we spoke about when we're dealing with complex problems, we don't want to do this in isolation. We want to use the same architecture in groups. So given that I have limited time, and I apologize for that, I want to just start winding down and summarizing. So let me just go to the next. What I've shared with you is I've shared with you a framework, a 4-step framework. The first 2 steps in the framework help you recover from stress, driving yourself to peak performance from the right. Step 3 helps you to fully engage in what's most important in your life and catalyze your health, relations, and productivity to drive you to the peak of the curve over here from the left. And then we spoke about step 4. We spoke about step 4, where step 4 has the ability where you ask good questions in your frame, find, evaluate, and apply spiral of growth that results in neuroplastic transformation. What that does, that doesn't only get you to peak performance. What that actually does is that shifts your curve up and to the right, where you achieve higher levels of performance at higher levels of stress. So, I just want to wrap up and actually share with you this curve over here offers an innovative idea for the industry. Last year in Bali, we spoke about SPA being synonymous with relaxation. So where are we on the curve with that? We're over here. We're coming up the curve from the right with SPA being relaxation. But now, this year, we've added wellness to the Global Health, the Global Spa and Wellness Summit. What we're now doing is we're now talking about promoting health, but I also encourage you to also consider the domains of relationships and productivity too, very specifically, all of which help you fully engage to drive you to the peak of the curve over here from the left. But as I wrap up, I want to leave you with an innovative idea where I think this really represents your major opportunity. What I want to encourage you to do is I want you to begin to explore all of the emerging science, the emerging brain science of neuroplasticity. Because if you can begin to leverage that and these practices, such as mindfulness practices, and speak to its benefits with neuroplastic transformation, then what you get to do is you get to, for yourself and for your clients, you get to move the curve up and to the right, where your clients can move, and you can move lives from good to great. So, as I leave this, actually, when you think about moving from good to great, not only will your clients be very satisfied with that, but that, by the way, is what offers a very enticing return on investment to corporations looking to invest with you in corporate wellness. So, as I wrap up, my hope this year is that SPA will be remembered for being more than just relaxation, but we can also imagine and innovate it as a destination of rejuvenation, wellness, peak performance, neuroplastic transformation, and neuroplastic change and ongoing transformation. Anyway, I just want to thank you. This week, may we continue to collaborate well together by framing great questions and finding, evaluating, and applying the answers we receive to innovate for the benefit of those we serve. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.